All right, we can go ahead and get started here as people are coming in, but I want to welcome you to Ag Smart Money Week. This is the third day of Ag Smart Money Week now, as we have daily webinars happening all week, at least one per day, all week this week. And Ag Smart Money Week is brought to you by the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Nebraska Extension. And we're glad to be offering this to help Nebraska farmers and ranchers to strengthen their financial foundations with tools and strategies for better business management. So whether it's your first time joining us this week or you've been on for multiple ones, we're glad to have you here. And you can find recordings of all of these webinars from the week, and you can still register for the ones we have coming up tomorrow and Friday at our website for the Center for Ag Profitability. That's cap.unl.edu/smartmoney. I'm Ryan Evans with the Center for Agricultural Profitability, and tonight we are focusing on the very important issue of cash flow management, which is key to financial planning as it helps producers anticipate expenses and identify shortfalls before they happen. So tonight you'll learn how to build a cash flow statement, to analyze income and expense timing, and use it all to make proactive business decisions. And to present for us, we are really glad to have the coordinator of Ag Smart Money Week, Shannon Sand. She's an extension educator and agricultural economist with the Center for Agricultural Profitability based in North Platte. And we definitely want to welcome any questions you have for Shannon during the presentation. Please type those right into the chat or the Q&A box, and we will work to get those answered before we wrap up tonight. So again, Shannon Sand, thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for helping pull all this together, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, now let's hope that I can share screens properly because I make no guarantees some days.
So far, so good.
Okay, so you can see everything okay?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. So, like Ryan said, I'm going to be talking about cash flows. And as we go through this, if you have questions, feel free, throw those in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to answer them. And Ryan, if something jumps out at you, please feel free to interrupt me. So kind of some of our objectives tonight are going to be just intro to farm financial analysis, talking about what is a cash flow, why is it important, how is it constructed, and then how can cash flows be used to actually make decisions. I've seen a lot of people talk about cash flows, but the reality is when I'm on my farmer ranch or my family's farmer ranch, I'm like, how do we use this cash flow to help us make decisions in the moment? Because I mean, that's a big deal. And especially depending on your operation and where you're at, I was like, these cash flows are life or death, in some situations. So for the business. So basically, cash flow is essentially the net amount of cash and cash equivalents being transferred in and out of a company or a business. It basically represents those inflows and outflows of money spent, right? You can look at my little cartoon doodle here, right? It's our income, it's our expenses, it's those inflows and outflows, it's the movement of money. Cash received signifies inflows, cash spent signifies outflows. The cash flow statement is a financial statement that reports on a company's sources and usage of cash over time. A company's cash flow is typically categorized as cash flow from operations, investing, and finance, which we'll go into a little more depth a little later. There are several different methods. Oh no, it's moving on me. It's not supposed to do that. It's like, I don't know. It's some setting I'm sure I have, and I'll be dealing with this now. It's like, sorry, y'all. But basically, there's a lot of different methods or several different methods used to analyze a company's cash flow, including the debt service coverage, a ratio, free cash flow, and then the unlevered cash flow. So there are a few different types of essentially cash flows, right? We have the operating cash flow. Basically, that refers to the net cash generated from a business's normal business operations. In actively growing and expanding companies, positive cash flow is required in order to maintain business growth, right? So if you're a cow-calf operator, your cash flow is probably pretty positive this year. So, you're doing great. So again, as long as all of your stuff's getting paid and your debt's very minimal. If you're looking at potentially expanding, it might be. Investing cash flow, this refers to the net cash generated from a company's investment related activities, right? Such as investments in physical assets. So, again, thinking buying cows, investing in buying a new pivot, a new tractor, things like that. So, the purchase of physical assets like equipment or property, or the sale of assets, right? In healthy companies that are actively investing in their business, this number, again, sometimes it can be negative. If we're buying property, right? We got to make those payments, we got to pay that off. Financing cash flow. This refers specifically to how cash moves between a company and its investors, owners, or operators or creditors. So it's the net cash generated to finance the company and could potentially include some debt, equity, and dividend payments, depending on, again, how things are defined and created. The importance of cash flows. Cash flows can be used to establish a loan repayment schedule that'll coincide with when revenue is coming into the farm business. It's really important for the farmer and rancher as well as the lender. This financial ratio tool or financial tool also helps you understand when and if an investment can be made during the year. It really allows you to, again, plan out those big spends, and even the little ones. So, you can use the information from a cash flow statement to determine liquidity problems. If the cash flows are not enough to cover the business expenses and the operating loan is higher at the end of the time period than it was at the beginning, there's a liquidity problem. So again, those cash flow statements can really help tell you what's going on in the operation. You can use the cash flow statement to determine which expenses can be adjusted to reduce the liquidity issue if you have one. Used in combination with the balance sheet and the income statement, which Jessica spoke about the balance sheet on Monday. Glennis even spoke a little bit about cash flows earlier today. And then on Friday, Anastasia Meyer is going to be talking about the profit and loss or income statement, basically using a combination of that balance sheet, cash flow, and income statement. They can be really useful in determining an operation's financial situation. So cash is constantly moving in and out of the operation. For example, when let's say a retailer purchases some sort of inventory. So again, I'm thinking of cows, y'all. I'm sorry. I deal a lot with ranchers out here. And that's my background too. So I generally oftentimes think in cows. So again, thinking now, right? Prices, yeah, it's really expensive to buy a new one, but some people are very flush with money depending on where you are in your business cycle and your cash flow. So again, money flows out of the business towards its suppliers in that case. So whoever your breeders are. So when that same, again, me being the seller sells something from its inventory, cash is going to flow into my business from whoever I'm selling it to. So whether that's contracts or on the grid, or if you're just selling it at the local market, things like that. So again, that cash flows into the business from its customers. So paying workers or utility bills represents cash flowing out of the business towards its debtors, while collecting a monthly installment on a customer purchase may be financed 18 months ago shows cash flowing into the business. The list goes on and on. There's lots of different ways to look at it. Profit is typically defined as the balance that remains when all of a business's operating expenses are subtracted from its revenues. It's what's left when the books are balanced and expenses are subtracted from proceeds. Profit can either be distributed to the owners and shareholders of the company, so salaries, wages, dividends, things like that, often in the form of dividend payments, again, or it can be reinvested back into the operation. Profits might, for example, be used to purchase again new inventory, or used to finance some sort of, maybe you have an idea you want to try out, you want to do a small plot on your operation. You can do that if you're wanting to try out, like, say, new seed or something, new fertilizer, or some sort of new opportunity or idea. So research and development in a way of new products or services. So like cash flow, profit can be depicted as positive or negative. When this calculation results in a negative number, it's typically referred to as a loss because the company spent more money operating than it was able to recoup from these operations. So, what's not included in a cash flow? Depreciation, right? It's not the same as an income statement, especially an accrual income statement. And in fact, again, they're very, very different. The cash flow budget does not include non-cash items like depreciation, inventory changes, and then changes in accounts payable and receivable. What is included, however, is a lot, right? So you see this big long list here. So the cash flow budget does include principal payments, cash payments for capital assets and new loan proceeds that the income statement does not include. A farm manager can cash flow very nicely for a while by just selling a few cows, as I'm sure some of us have done at certain times in our lives, pieces of machinery, acres of land, or just allowing accounts payable to continue to build. The accrual income statement will quickly identify this situation as unprofitable, however. Again, this is why all those financial statements really work together. And again, Jessica Grosskopf on Monday, I think, has a really great visual kind of showing how those go together. But the cash flow budget, we'll see a positive in that case again. So positive cash flow does not necessarily mean profitability or vice versa. The cash flow budget is also not a substitute for the enterprise budget. The enterprise budget includes things like depreciation, opportunity costs, both of which are non-cash items not found on the cash flow budget. I would say if you have more questions about that, again, you could watch Glennis's earlier where she did some on the ag budget calculator. She talked a little bit about the economic versus the cash options on that software. So you can really toggle between that. A cash flow budget really consists of cash coming in or leaving the business. Net cash flow must be positive or at least zero, like break even, right? While it can be negative on a spreadsheet, in real life, it must be at least zero, even if that means bills and debt service are not necessarily getting paid. And I see I have a chat. Oh, okay. So what are some ways of knowing knowing our cash flow could be helpful, right? So the cash flow budget is really, and I'm specifically talking about the cash flow budget here, is really a plan of how cash will be coming into our operation, our cash inflows, and leaving the operation, which is our cash outflows. The key word is cash, right? If cash is not entering or leaving one's pockets, then it does not go on the cash flow budget. The cash flow budget provides three primary values for the principal manager. It forces the planning function of management, which I know we don't all necessarily enjoy doing, but it is really important part of our jobs and our businesses. It also provides a mean of communicating the amount and the timing of borrowing and investment needs with a lender. So when I always do cash flow with people, particularly again, I'm a big fan of cash flow budgets. I know not everybody is, but I always think it's really helpful because you can have a printout, you can take it to your lender and you can be like, okay, this is when I'm planning, because again, life happens, but this is the general plan. This is how we're planning on spending our money. This is what we think we're going to get in. This is what we think we're going to end up with. So it's again, serves a really great function, particularly with lenders. During the times of low profitability, cash flow can be a survival strategy. So again, you could have, certain things be negative on your balance sheet and your income statement, but by selling again some cows that maybe you hadn't planned on, maybe you're culling a little more, whatever's happening, you can cash flow for a little bit. But that is not a long-term strategy to keep selling off pieces of your business. But yeah, completing the cash flow budget requires that the manager plans ahead, knows and or estimates what they will raise, input needs, input costs, output prices, capital asset replacements if needed, sales or purchases, and then other factors that could either provide or take cash from that business. By using a cash flow statement and cash flow budget, The producer can basically make well-informed management decisions, such as when to purchase new equipment or when to open a line of credit to cover cash deficit periods. So again, that can just be really handy to have to be able to have these discussions with people. There are a lot of different ways to set up your cash flow. It is quite amazing. So you can do it via monthly, quarterly, whatever suits your purposes. And now I can't get this thing to work. Hold on just a second, y'all. I apologize. So there's a bunch of different ways to set it up. Again, you can do monthly, you can go do quarterly, you can do twice a year, or you can do annual. I generally, again, when I'm working with a producer or industry or a set of producers, I often will use monthly ones just because it's easier to see those cash inflows and outflows. And again, when you're going to talk to your lender, it depends on your industry though. Sometimes quarterly is great. So here's a lovely example of a quarterly example. So this just has, again, the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. It's got our cash inflows, our cash expenditures, and then basically kind of what our quarterly net cash flow is. You can see in the third quarter, we're negative, but again, not necessarily something to panic over. It's just that that month we're spending a lot, or that quarter we're spending more money for, you know, our expenditures. We've got debt payments and things that we're doing then. And again, it just really is a great planning tool for your business. So here again are some additional ones. This is basically just an annual cash flow. So in this case for 2023, we're estimating that we will have $50,000 in revenues from sales of livestock. And we are debating about basically adding some additional fencing to our property in this case. So we're looking at, again, using this as a potential way to figure out, can we afford to add to the operation? So this is an example of essentially a monthly. I know this one looks scary. There are much simpler options out there if you find this slightly overwhelming, but this is a monthly cash flow budget basically for 2022. And this one basically is just, again, month by month. It allows you to look and see, again, when we're negative, when we're not, when we're potentially going to need more funds. So again, this is another monthly one. This is much simpler. Again, we just have cash inflows, cash outflows, and then we have our 12-month time period. So we also have the Ag Budget Calculator, which creates enterprise budgets, and from those enterprise budgets can do a cash flow, a monthly cash flow projection. So those enterprise budgets are what you think your enterprise is going to do. Again, these are just planning tools, so they're really great to use for your operation. This one is free through cap.unl.edu. Brian, if you get a chance, if you could throw that link in there. But it's just a handy tool. It's free to use. You put your stuff in it, and then you have an idea. So in this case, in this example, you can see the beginning cash balance was $0, right? But January, we had 25,000 coming in. And then we have our revenue, we have our labor, we have our fuel, we have our materials, we have our overhead, we have our total expenses. So we have all of these set out again, January through December, and then we have our total entered, whatever that may be. And then we have a nice, lovely total expenses at the bottom here, as well as, again, that ending cash balance. So starting in January, we have 25,000 here. We spent 3,485 on our overhead. And then again, depending on how in depth you want to go, you could go real in depth with these, right? So from our beginning cash balance in January, at the end of January, so think January 31, we're going to have bills paid. So we've got 23,000 and change left. February, obviously that goes over. We've got, again, those overhead bills. So again, that takes away from our balance from March. We've got labor, we've got fuel, we've got materials, and we've got overhead. So again, we've got total expenses of $9,761. So we've got 10,000. So in April, see, this is where the planning can come in, especially when you're working with your lender. It's really nice to have something like this. You don't have to, but it's great. You got labor, you got fuel of 23,000, you've got materials, you've got overhead, and you've got total expenses, right? So you've got a negative cash flow right now, again, which is okay, especially if you have an operating loan and things like this. But this is when it's really handy to have in order to do that. So again, these are really nice to have in order to plan out your cash expenditures, because we have several months from what, April through October where we're negative. And again, not necessarily a bad thing if we've got loans to cover everything, but just great for planning purposes. So very helpful. So measures from the cash flow statement. So the cash flow statement provides information on a business's repayment capacity. Again, lenders really like to be able to look at somebody's ability to repay. Repayment capacity basically shows the borrower's ability to repay debts on time. It includes non-farm income and as such is not a measure of business performance alone. Some recommended repayment capacity formulas are the debt coverage ratio. That indicates whether your business generated enough income to cover its current interest expense and all intermediate and long-term debt payments. The replacement coverage ratio, basically a ratio of less than 1 indicates that you did not generate enough income to cover debt payments and unfunded capital purchases. So term debt and finance lease coverage ratio, this is a newer one to me. It indicates whether your business generated enough income to cover all intermediate and long-term debt payments. Again, in this case, a ratio of less than 1 indicates that the business had to liquidate inventories, run up open accounts, or borrow additional funds or sell assets to make scheduled payments. Oh my gosh, it's just skipping all over. So when I do in-person stuff related to farm finance, whether that's cash flows, income statements, and balance sheets, I oftentimes like to use the Farm Financial Scorecard. This was created by the Center for Farm Financial Management, which is a group of like bankers, university people, government entities, basically wanting to, again, help create sustainable long-term businesses for farm and ranch folks. But basically, all this does is it kind of lets you put in your own current ratio, put in your working capital, pull from your cash flow, balance sheet, and income statement, or profit and loss statement, depending on what you grew up calling it. It basically allows you to pull from those and look at your liquidity, your solvency, your profitability, your repayment capacity, and your financial efficiency. Jessica Groskopf talked a little bit about liquidity and solvency in relation to the balance sheet. That's where most of those, that's where I shouldn't say all of those, but that's where a good chunk of that comes from. So again, this is just a really nice way to look at and kind of have an idea of where your operation is. And your operation may be red, yellow, or green in one area versus the other. So again, I wouldn't panic too much, basically, is what I'm saying. But it's a nice way to kind of get a temperature check on where your operation is, especially depending on if you're growing or if you're staying the same or if you're trying to shrink your operation. So repayment capacity, again, we're focused on cash flows tonight. So the debt coverage ratio is basically repayment and replacement capacity divided by the total debt repayment. The replacement coverage ratio is repayment and replacement capacity divided by total debt repayment plus unfunded capital expenditures. And then the term debt and finance lease coverage ratio is the term debt repayment and replacement capacity divided by the total principal and interest on term debt and finance leases. So the primary use of cash flow budget is to project basically the timing of cash inflows and outflows, and then to plan for borrowing if shortfalls in cash flows occur. Which, with farming and ranching, you have one or a few times a year where you're in the negative, So again, but that's why you plan your operating loans and you figure things out. So cash flow is just really nice way to plan for borrowing if we think there's going to be shortfalls in cash flow. A cash flow budget can really point out ways to more efficiently time expense payments. For instance, if a farm or ranch sells calves in the fall, a significant expense such as insurance might be scheduled at that time as well, right? So if we can kind of time our scheduling, which in some cases we can, in some cases we cannot, but if we can time it for when we get paid, that's always nice. So, um, management can use a cash flow budget as a monitor and control for cash outflows and inflows for the year. Managers can develop a cash flow budget in one of two ways. You can use last year's cash flow and adjusted cash outflows and inflows by the expected change in expenses and income. That's what a lot of people do. I mean, it's easiest a lot of times to look at our history because we have, again, if you're using QuickBooks or Quicken or Easy Farm, or, I mean, there's a ton of them out there. Red Wing, there's 8,000 softwares, depending on what you're using. An Excel spreadsheet will work just fine. So you can use those previous years' actual cash flows to help project what you think the new ones are based on what you think those changes in input costs are going to be. And you can build it that way. You could also use enterprise budgets to build a cash flow budget. Again, I mentioned a little earlier about that ABC budget calculator that Glennis talked about earlier today. That is basically the second method. My gosh, this thing is just going off on me here. Sorry. So basically you can use the enterprise budget in order to also make a cash flow budget. The second method, using an enterprise budget, is very detailed and takes into account changes in cropping and livestock production, such as different crop acres or more cows to calve for the coming year. So again, if you're changing your business, an enterprise budget might be a good way to create a cash flow off of. So that's just one potential idea. And now I will open it up to questions if we actually have any. Oh, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Shannon. Great presentation there, and no questions yet, but we do have some time here. So if anybody has something you'd like to get in the chat or the Q&A while we have Shannon, please do that and take advantage of her great expertise if you have any questions that you would like to have answered. I did put in the chat there the link to find all of our webinars from this week for Ag Smart Money Week. The ones we've done so far are already posted, the recordings of them. This one will be added later this evening as well at cap.unl.edu/smartmoney. So again, we'll hang on for a couple minutes here and see if anybody has questions, if you're okay with that, Shannon.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. And if you're not comfortable asking it in this situation, you can shoot me an email or give me a phone call. I'm here. So.
All right. What are the warning signs of an emerging cash flow problem, and what early steps can be taken to correct it? Great question.
That is a good question. I feel like there's a lot of them. So again, I'm thinking of back, if you're looking at your monthly cash flow and you're negative more often than not, it's really time to potentially not just dig into our cash flows, but look at our balance sheets and our income statements and see what's going on. And I'm talking about like if we're having a black swan event or something scary is going on. I'm going to be on, I'm just going to go back to 2020. Okay. So it's like, I know many of us don't want to do that because it was a half a decade ago. But at that point in time, there were a lot of people that were putting pen to paper because were you even going to be able to sell your product? How was it going to get out? There was a lot of bottlenecks in terms of the industry. So it was really time for people to look at their operation, how much debt did they have, and then what all did they have going on. So an emerging cash flow problem, though, is if you're looking at your bills and at the end of the year you're negative and you're potentially overextended, or if you're continuously selling off pieces of the operation. So I'm going to give you a typical Southern answer here. There's a lot of small Southern ranchers. if the air conditioner breaks, they will sell cows to meet that need because they don't have an emergency fund. And I can say this because I'm related to some of these people. So, but that's when it's time to start looking at things. So, but yeah,
Great. Thank you, Shannon. And if anybody else has any questions, again, that was a great question.
it
We're
was
here,
very good.
we can hang out. And she says, thank you for that answer. So,
Thank you.
so we'll hang on for another minute or two and see if anybody else would like to type one in while we have Shannon here with us.
Yeah, that's fine.
And while you're possibly thinking of those, I'll just run down what we've got going on to round out Ag Smart Money Week this week. Tomorrow at noon Central Time, we will be hearing from Brad Lubin at UNL. He's our extension policy specialist, ag policy specialist, as well as Alejandro Plastina, who works with the Rural and Farm Finance Policy Analysis Center at the University of Missouri. And they will be going over the latest Nebraska and U.S. farm income projections and the outlook ahead for the farm income situation in the state and the country. So that's tomorrow at noon, presented as part of Ag Smart Money Week. And then we'll finish things up on Friday, as Shannon mentioned earlier, with a look at profit and loss statements and how they measure profitability and net worth growth. And that will be with Anastasia Meyer, one of our extension ag economists here at Nebraska. So we hope you can join us for those. You can find those registrations again on our website at the link I put in the chat earlier at cap.unl.edu/smartmoney. Well, Shannon, I don't see any other further questions right now. So I think we can wrap it up if you're okay with that. I want to thank again everybody for joining us tonight. And when you close out your Zoom window, you'll see a very brief survey. If you don't mind just offering your feedback on that, it should take about 30 seconds or so. Just lets us know how we're doing and any ideas you have for future webinars from the Center for Ag Profitability. So thank you again for attending this evening. And Shannon, thanks for the great presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, everyone.